One of the things I love to start out with a track talk is if you have been here before, try to see if it's still there. If you have never been here before, try to find a favorite one. But we're going to be looking for a dinosaur track that has 3 large toes. Try and see if you can find a really cool looking track for yourself.
Do you, Maddie? Yeah. Do you see any dinosaur tracks with 3 toes? And down in the water?
Everybody's been able to find one of those tracks? There's a lot of them in this track site. Now when you think of a dinosaur track that has 3 large toes, what are some species that instantly just come to mind? T-Rex, right? Absolutely. There's another real big one. He's a little guy, but he's a really big famous one.
Raptor.
A raptor, right? Now, unfortunately, I didn't have y'all bring up those dinosaurs so that I could come in and say neither of them made these tracks. But for me to say that the dinosaur that did is related to those dinosaurs. Now you're looking at dinosaur tracks here, these 3-toed tracks, and anywhere else in the park that we have these 3-toed tracks like this specifically is Acrocanthosaurus. Now Acrocanthosaurus is very similar to T-Rex with 3 differences. Number 1, you're looking at dinosaur tracks that are 50 million years older than T-Rex. So these tracks in total are over 113 million years old. T-Rex is only 60 to 65 million years old. So these are older. Second reason this guy's different is their size. T-Rex would probably have been maybe 15 to 20 feet tall, maybe 10 tons or so. Acrocanthosaurus here was about 10 to 15 feet tall, over 35 feet in length, and weighed over 7 tons. Still a pretty big dinosaur, right? Third and final reason this guy's different, are y'all familiar with Spinosaurus? Spinosaurus has that ridge that goes down its back from its head to its tail. Acrocanthosaurus had a little ridge as well. It wasn't as tall as Spinosaurus, but T-Rex didn't have anything like that. It was just a flat back. So other than that, they're very similar in all other aspects. 2 legs, 3 toes, a long tail, short little arms, and a very powerful jaw. Now Acrocanthosaurus here is also considered to be the apex predator. If you're the apex predator, are you at the bottom or the top of the food chain?
Top.
You're at the top, right? You can eat anything and everything that you want to because you're at the top of the food chain. Nothing can touch you, right? T-Rex was the same exact way. T-Rex was the apex predator. Acrocanthosaurus here was the apex predator as well. But there's another dinosaur in this track site. It's a very popular dinosaur that really helped make us a state park. This next dinosaur makes Acrocanthosaurus look extremely small. Do y'all think it's easy to make a 7-ton dinosaur look small? No. But this next guy does it very easily, right? I'm gonna point out 5 tracks for y'all real quick. We have a back foot right here, another back foot right here, to a front foot, to 2 back feet here and here. Those 5 tracks belong to one of, if not the tallest dinosaur to ever walk around on the earth. It also belongs to the state dinosaur of Texas. This dinosaur is Sauroposeidon. Now Sauroposeidon, I mentioned, is one of, if not the tallest to ever walk around, doing so at over 60 feet tall. It was over 115 feet in length, and it weighed over 44 tons. It was a massive dinosaur. Kind of put that guy in perspective for y'all. This cliffside behind us right here that y'all see, at the top of that cliffside there's a hiking trail called our Limestone Ledge. Hiking down that trail will help take you to the top of the scenic overlook. If Sauroposeidon was here today, that dinosaur could stand in the river, look over those trees, and see you walking down that hiking trail. That's how tall this dinosaur was. Now, Sauroposeidon was also an herbivore, just like Brontosaurus or Brachiosaurus you may be more familiar with. But other than that, the height was the only thing. They're very similar. 4 legs, a long tail, and a really long neck. That's really the main difference. That long neck and that slender body is what allowed Sauroposeidon to become one of, if not the tallest, to ever walk around. It walked around the same time Acrocanthosaurus did 113 million years ago. Now, these tracks here at Dinosaur Valley, we like to say that they are world-class dinosaur tracks. There's really a couple reasons why we say that, but why do y'all think, looking at these tracks, why we might claim that our two species right here, the tracks that we have, are world-class? What are some reasons y'all think? There's no wrong answer.
They're very well preserved.
Very well preserved, absolutely. We take a lot of pride in preserving our dinosaur tracks.
The number of tracks.
The number of tracks. We have hundreds to thousands of dinosaur tracks throughout this park. Absolutely. There's one more important detail that we're missing.
The age of the tracks.
The age, they're old, 113 million years old, right? I gave y'all a hint, the detail of our tracks. Right? We're missing that detail because these tracks are very detailed. They're very pristine in how they actually look. I'm going to show y'all 3 examples for why we say that these tracks are world class. The first one, we're going to look at this back foot for Sauroposeidon right here. Y'all notice on that edge of the track closest to me, there's those small holes and indentions in that track. Those small holes and indentions are the individual toenails of that dinosaur's back foot. When the dinosaur walked around back then, it was actually able to capture those individual toenails in the mud, and it actually preserved that way. That's world class. Second reason. How many of y'all have a dog? I know, that's a weird segue, right? Trying to figure out dinosaur tracks and ask who has a dog. But it comes together, I promise. Well, on a dog, they have a dew claw, which is that little bump up their leg just a little bit. Acrocanthosaurus had a dew claw as well. And it's really rare that you not only get the entire track, but that dew claw of a dinosaur. This 3-toed Acrocanthosaurus track right here, you'll notice coming off the back end, there's a small little line. It's a very faint line coming off the back of that foot. That's that dew claw's imprint. You're looking at a track that went closer to that 7-ton range, so when the dinosaur stepped in the mud, it captured that dew claw because of how far into the ground it sank. That's world class. The third and final reason we like to say for this site specifically, we have a back foot for Sauroposeidon and a left foot for Acrocanthosaurus. 2 different species stepping within 6 inches of each other, and neither one of them destroyed the other's track. That's rare. Normally the bigger dinosaurs kind of cover up the smaller dinosaur's track, but we get both of them. That's rare. That's world class. Now because we say world class, the National Park Service even also designated us a National Natural Landmark. A designation that we still hold to this day because of how well preserved and pristine our dinosaur tracks actually are in the park itself. Now before I go on, do y'all have any questions so far that y'all would like to ask?
Just one thing. So you said the
Acrocanthosaurus?
Acrocanthosaurus and Sauroposeidon were like 113 years ago compared to the T-Rex and Spinosaurus and Macrocanthosaurus, right?
Right.
So they, if you think about it, they were essentially sort of early versions of T-Rex and Macrocanthosaurus, right?
Essentially, yep. And that's why we have our 2 dinosaur models at the entrance of the park. They're distant cousins to each other. So those 2 models very much closely resemble what our 2 species would have looked like with just those very slight differences I mentioned earlier. That's why we have those 2 models up there, because that's the closest thing. We don't have models for these 2, unfortunately. Just have tracks. Be cool, all right? Any other questions y'all have? Got a question? How many do we have in the park? So right now we have over 10 track sites here in the park altogether, and you're at the main track site. This is track site number 2, essentially on the map. But track site, the rest of them are going to be upriver this way. All the track sites are found within the river itself. And we have over 10 track sites here in the park. Most of the other track sites, you'll notice that this one is roped off with signs. The other track sites, you can actually get right up to the dinosaur track and touch the dinosaur track. This track site specifically is just real fragile. Question? absolutely. We definitely think that's one of the theories in this area that we're actually looking at for what the tracks are actually showing us. And one of the reasons that's rare when we look at like predation with hunting is we have a front foot for Sauroposeidon right here. Now, a lot of y'all said you had dogs. You'll notice when a dog walks around, that back foot typically replaces where that front foot stepped. So you don't really see the front foot as much, just the back foot. That same theory holds true for any four-legged animal, even dinosaurs. So when we look at a front foot for a Sauroposeidon right here, if that theory wasn't true, then there should be a front foot right here, and there's not. So something happened, predation, hunting, that made this dinosaur jump, skip, run, miss a step, slip, who knows, and we now have a front foot right there. Because one of the reasons we can look at that, here's an Acrocanthosaurus track coming this direction. Over here where my shadow is, there's another one coming this way. We have several Acrocanthosaurus coming up this direction, following those tracks right towards the back part of Sauroposeidon. There's hunting taking place, which enabled us to have a front foot for Sauroposeidon, which is rare.
So you're saying that in Acrocanthosaurus, or possibly multiple, were sleeping up on a bunch of Sauroposeidon, and one of them possibly got sick and startled and jumped away.
Yep, absolutely. Right. So now, do y'all think a fully grown 7-ton Acrocanthosaurus could take down by itself a fully grown 44-ton Sauroposeidon? No, not necessarily. Sauroposeidon was too big, right? It took a lot of effort that Acrocanthosaurus by itself didn't have. So unfortunately, this is going to sound real sad, but this is what they did. They would go after the juveniles. They're smaller, right? A juvenile for Sauroposeidon would only be maybe 10 to 12 tons. Just a couple tons bigger than Acrocanthosaurus, easier to manage. If they were going to take down a fully grown one, they would hunt in packs. So maybe 2 or 3 of them together. And that's how they would take down those fully grown ones, because they could do it together, but not by themselves. Any other questions y'all have so far before we go on? All good? All right.
So is the speculation on these tracks here that they're juvenile?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the speculations here. Just because of the size here at this track site compared to others, at one point these also could have been adults, and just the weathering and erosion of the tracks just worn them down to a smaller size. But these could also be juvenile tracks too, just because at the ballroom site there are larger back feet for Sauroposeidon there. Okay. So those tracks there are adults. These ones, multiple factors coming into how these track sizes actually play with how big these tracks actually are. Yep.
So it's still kind of up to debate whether it's an adult that got washed out and there's just not enough other tracks to indicate that there's a pack hunting.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Any other questions so far? One more? Yeah, they do. So think of like present-day elephants, right? Where you have those herds of elephants that protect their young in the center and they form a circle around them, right? Sauroposeidon was the same way. They walked around in herds, large groups. So the adult Sauroposeidons, the parents would actually protect the young, which made it harder for Acrocanthosaurus, which is why they had to hunt in packs every once in a while. But they would protect them just like present-day elephants do today. Very similar. So we do get a lot of questions here at this track site specifically over those large holes that y'all see all the way over there. Unfortunately, they are not tracks. There were tracks used to be, but those specific holes are excavation sites. Before we became a state park, they actually dug out the dinosaur tracks in this area. Now, one thing I love to do is kind of go through the history of how the park was actually built, because our park was built and founded on the foundation around the dinosaur tracks in the river. Right? So what I like to say is we're going to do 113 million years in 10 minutes to present day. Right? So 1908, when we're going to first look at, that's the next date, but we're going to back up a little farther to 113 million years ago. We got to talk about how the tracks were actually created to know what we're looking at. So if you were here 113 million years ago, do you think you'd be standing in a riverbed like you are today? No. What large body of water do you think this might have been?
Possibly a lake.
Even bigger. It was an ocean. Specifically, what was to become the Gulf of Mexico. Now, between 120 to 90 million years, the Gulf of Mexico came all the way up to here, and Glen Rose sits on the edge of that ancient ocean coastline. Now, this wasn't the kind of beach you'd like to go vacation at. This wasn't like nice sand beaches and clear water like you find on the coast today. No. This was a muddy, swampy, and marshy beach. It was the kind of mud that when you step in and pull your foot out, the mud has sucked your shoe off, and you got to dig your shoe out of the mud. And then once you do get your shoe out, the one thing about that mud, the consistency holds the shape extremely well. It doesn't get destroyed. Our dinosaurs walked around in that very similar type of mud. When they walked around on this coastline, they stepped in because they weighed 7 tons and 44 tons. They left large impressions and imprints in the rock, in the mud, which ultimately hardened into rock. Over time, as they stepped in the mud, you have the tides constantly coming in and out, filling in those tracks with other layers of mud, sediment, water. And as more layers began to cover up these tracks, from all that weight, you have compaction. And it hardened that mud into limestone. All of our track sites are in limestone rock. It's a very calcium-rich rock. Just like the mud back then was a very calcium-rich mud. Now, our tracks have been covered up for 113 million years. But they were first uncovered in this area by the river and discovered in 1908. That's it, 113 years ago. In 1908, they discovered Acrocanthosaurus tracks in this area. They found them in a creek bed near the city of Glen Rose. Well, the Paluxy River is about 20-25 miles long in total length. In Glen Rose, all the creeks feed off or into the river at some point. So they traced those creeks back to the river, followed the river back, and started walking up and down the river. And then all of a sudden, they found the largest abundance of dinosaur tracks in this section of the river. Now I'm going to ask y'all a question. You discover Acrocanthosaurus tracks for the first time in this area. They had found evidence for this dinosaur elsewhere, but you're the first person in this area to learn and see that there's dinosaur tracks. What would you have done with those tracks in this area that you discovered? What do y'all think? Immediately what? Look at them? Absolutely. What else would y'all do? You got a hand up? Oh, a question? Okay.
Probably dig them up.
Dig them up, remove them. You want to keep them for yourself, right?
Right.
You can make imprints.
Make imprints and molds? Absolutely. Right? Well, their first impression was dig them out of the riverbed because they saw a money-making opportunity. Now, they were doing this during the 1920s and 30s after they made this discovery. Early 1900s to 1920s and the 1930s, almost 30 years. What was going on in the U.S. during the 1920s and 30s? The Great Depression. So in this area, the only thing that people had that was a consistent thing to make money were the dinosaur tracks. Other than that, they didn't have much other resources to provide for their family. But they could sell a dinosaur track and provide for their family on a weekly or daily basis. And that's exactly what they did. They dug out the dinosaur tracks and sold them. A lot of the tracks are untraceable where they actually went. Someone sold them to a family member, well, that person gave the money to them, and then they sold them to someone else, and so on and so on. Who knows where those individual tracks went? 30 years they've been doing this. And then all of a sudden in 1938, a researcher called Roland T. Bird, R.T. Bird, heard about the dinosaur tracks in this area. And he wanted to see for himself why all of a sudden Glen Rose, in the middle of north central Texas, that has never been on the map, is suddenly on the map and going crazy about dinosaur tracks. So he came to see for himself. He found that we had all these Acrocanthosaurus tracks and confirmed that that was the species for sure. But then he found something much else. I mentioned that these Sauroposeidon tracks right here are very special to us earlier. And the reason being is not only because they're the tallest dinosaur to ever walk around, or because it's a state dinosaur of Texas, but because these tracks right here are the world's first discovery for that species. They didn't know this dinosaur could walk around on land. They thought it was aquatic. It needed the water to move. When they first discovered tracks right here by Roland T. Byrd in 1938, it changed everything. The movement, the diet, the size, and the habitat for that dinosaur. Changed everything. Now I'm going to ask you all the same question I did earlier, but this one's a little bit different in the sense of you are now not only the first person in this area to discover tracks, but you're the first person in the entire world to discover dinosaur tracks. No one else knows about them except for you. What would you do with those dinosaur tracks? Preserve them? Absolutely.
Tell scientists and researchers about
Tell scientists, buy the land? Absolutely. You want to tell someone about it?
Charge people to come see it?
That sounds strangely familiar, doesn't it? Put them for display? Absolutely, right? People have said build a park and sell tickets, right? Which sounds familiar too, right? Well, ultimately, they didn't do much of those things. Their first instinct, world's first, let's put them in a museum, which ultimately means dig them out of the riverbed. Now, this track site here, they took out a bunch of the tracks for Acrocanthosaurus. But you may have noticed on your park map, there's a track site called the R.T. Byrd. It's just upriver this way just a little bit. Off the edge of where we're standing, there's a rock shelf that comes out into the water. That rock shelf has a 90-degree angle cut in the rock. Nature can't do that. Only one species on Earth can. Us. So that rock shelf's about 30 yards long or so. And they removed the entire 30-yard track layer and put them in museums around the country. Two major locations. The American Museum of Natural History in New York City, where R.T. Byrd was actually from. And then the Texas Memorial Museum down in Austin on the UT campus was the other location a lot of the tracks went. Now they didn't take out a bunch of tracks because it took a long time to dig them out. They had to dig these tracks out by hand. They don't have any tools like we do today to take out rock. One Acrocanthosaurus track could probably take someone, if they did it correctly and worked every day, maybe about a month or two to dig out by hand. One track. Think how long it took them to dig out 30 yards by hand. Over 25 years. It took them a long time to do so, decades. Because how many chances do you get to dig out a dinosaur track? One. You mess it up, you've ruined it. It's over. Now something else happened in this area. They were digging these tracks out. But the people in Glen Rose and Somervell County came to a realization. And they said, we have something special and unique that nowhere in the state of Texas right now has. We should protect it and have tourism come to Glen Rose. Now there are 89 Texas state parks in our agency, and each and every single one of them was founded on the basis that someone along the line came in and said, this is special, this is unique, and this needs to be protected. For us here, those citizens in Glen Rose said these dinosaur tracks are special, these dinosaur tracks are unique, these dinosaur tracks need to be protected. So they signed petitions and they raised money to turn this land into a national park. Not a state park, a national park. Because at that point in time, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, Big Bend, those parks are essentially mini cities within themselves. That's what they wanted here. They wanted a national monument for our dinosaur tracks, a national park in this area. Well, the National Park Service already had a dinosaur-themed park, Dinosaur National Monument in Utah and Colorado. They didn't want a second one. But what they did do is they granted us in 1968 that National Natural Landmark status. Fantastic. It doesn't necessarily help protect the tracks because they're in a riverbed, and a riverbed in the state of Texas is a public waterway, meaning anybody can come on here and do what they want because it's a public waterway. So, December of 1968, we like to say the best thing in the world actually happened. In that month of 1968, Texas Parks and Wildlife bought the lands. Now, they only bought about 300 acres or so of this area, which included the river with the tracks and what we call the south side, which is where all the parking lots and the headquarters is. That's the south side of the river. The north side, where all the hiking trails are, well, we didn't own that yet. Now, when they first bought the land, there's a couple things they have to do with the land. Number one, what do we do with it? People in this area wanted tourism, state park. That's going to be the best option. So they decided to turn this area into a state park. But the second thing you have to do with that land before you can build on it, you have to advertise it, which means that you have to give it a name. So they ultimately decided our name came by pretty easy compared to other Texas state parks. Dinosaur tracks, dinosaur. Pretty simple. But Dinosaur State Park is not enough. They decided that when they looked at the topography, how this land actually moves, and when you're at the top of the overlook, you'll notice that the river flows through, and we sit inside a valley. Dinosaur Valley State Park. That was going to be the new name for their newest Texas state park. And in 1969, we became an official park. And in 1972, after they finished construction, we opened our doors to the public forever. Now, there's something special about 1972. Because next year, 2022, will be our 50th anniversary open to the public as a Texas state park. 50 years we've been protecting hundreds to thousands of dinosaur tracks from one discovery. 50 years of protecting prairie, forest, and river ecosystem. 50 years of protecting not only the original 300 acres, but now more than 1,700 in this park. 50 years from one person making a discovery that changed the world right here. What I like to end on before I get to some of y'all's questions as well is that if you want to make a discovery in the future, there are 89 parks right now. With what we have here today, we could have well over 110 Texas state parks. Because our park was founded on one discovery by one person. And you could do the exact same thing, and you could have a state park built after your discovery. Y'all have any questions or anything about the tracks or the park itself? I'm more than happy to help get y'all coordinated to different areas as well.
I noticed the grasslands coming in. Were they already here or were they planted?
The prairies, those are natural. Yep. The big one that you see right up here with the really tall grass, we actually prescribed burned that back in January. Yes, it's been a while. January. Yeah. And you see just how much has come back.
Yeah.
Prescribed burning removes all the invasive species and all those harmful animals that like to get in there and just harm the prairies, and those are native.
Okay.
Y'all know how much percentage of prairies are actually left in North America?
It said it's very small.
1%.
Oh.
We protect a very small portion of native prairies in the country and the world. We're right here at the park. Prescribed burning helps ensure that they stay native.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you worry about flooding?
Flooding?
In the spring, you guys get a lot of rain. So.
We do get a lot of rain, and the flooding does destroy the tracks.
So
yep.
do they have dams upriver to keep? No,
unfortunately not, and the reason being is that a river in the state of Texas is a public waterway. By law, you can't alter the course of a river. So we have talked about, don't worry, it's been discussed, because we want to protect the tracks. You can't have Dinosaur Valley without the dinosaur, right? We discussed it, but within 30 seconds, we were like, nope, can't do that, right?
So how long do you think they're going to last?
Here, these tracks, they've been around for 113 years. You may have noticed this one is the only one that's roped off. We put signs up yesterday, a little bit more to make people aware, don't go in here. Because this track site is extremely fragile. These tracks, maybe, no more than maybe another 100 years.
Okay.
And they'll probably be gone.
Right.
If that, maybe 60.
So how deep was the water here?
It's about 7 feet in this area. It was a shoreline, so it was real shallow.
Oh, gotcha.
Yep.
All right.
You have a question?
So were there invasive species in this area?
We do have invasive species today. Yep, here in the park. Some prairies have invasive species, which is why we prescribe burn them to remove those species out and have our native species like bluestem. We do have invasive species here in the park, but it's one of those things, we protect all species regardless of where they come from. So we protect everything.
Any specific in Johnson grass,
is one of the invasive species that we have that actually, I know she's our expert. Katie's our expert over there. But Johnson grass is one of the invasive species that harms our prairies over time. It can take over real quick and push out our native blue stem that we have. But prescribed burning fixes that.
So how can you prescribe burn?
We prescribe burn every couple years. I think the larger prairie we do every 5 years, and the smaller one across on the other side every 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
That way it allows those prairie to come back, allow the animals to move back in, and then we'll burn it, and it removes all those threats. Got a question real quick?
Did you guys find any dinosaur fossils?
We have found fossils here in the park. Unfortunately, none that are linked directly to the dinosaurs as of yet. And the reason I say yet is because while we have found their tracks, underneath your feet, where you're sitting and standing right now, and where I'm even right now, there are dinosaur tracks and evidence of them underneath this whole rock area that y'all are on. You'll notice you're 2 feet higher than the tracks. Those tracks came from somewhere. And the reason we know that to be true, this dinosaur track all the way over here really wasn't there about 10 to 12 years ago. There's a new one. As the river floods, it destroys the tracks, but brings about new ones. So this rock ledge that y'all are standing on, the rope, we actually had to push back about 2 feet because it exposed that track, which came from under here. So there's tracks under this entire rock area about 2 feet down that no one has ever seen before because they are still buried to this day. Who knows what's under there? We
So
do have
that's still
bones or
eroding?
whatnot itself.
It's still eroding?
It is.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's a natural process. It's one of those things that we do everything we can to protect the dinosaur tracks. But unfortunately, the realization we have is that Mother Nature is always going to win. It's just an unfortunate fact that we have to realize. So we should be lucky to experience the tracks while they're here before they're gone. You got a question?
There's also a dinosaur track right here.
Yep. That's the one, that's the new one that we found about 10 to 12 years ago from the river flooding. Absolutely. Any other questions y'all have?
Which dinosaur tracks did that one came from?
So that one right there, that's Acrocanthosaurus. That's that 10 to 15 foot tall, 7-ton carnivore that walked around. It's a pretty big one.
Can you see any of the bones in the park?
We don't have any bones of the dinosaurs that are visible. If we do have any, they're still buried under rock, but we haven't found any. The only evidence of the dinosaurs we have as of right now are their tracks.
So does that make you believe that they moved on to better and grassy lands?
Well, one of the theories that we believe that happened is something that happens today with the dinosaurs going extinct, is you have a species that can use the resources a certain way. And they can use them pretty good. But then you have, at some point in time, another species come in and can use those resources better. So therefore, because our dinosaurs got pushed out, eventually another species came in and can use those same resources in this area better, and eventually our dinosaurs couldn't compete with that, and just that was it. That's our theory. You had a question right here real quick?
I've noticed that some of the Acrocanthosaurus tracks are smaller than the others. Did they get weathered away, or were those Acrocanthosaurus juveniles?
Both, yes. Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of the smaller ones are most likely they could be juveniles as well, but we're also seeing weathering and erosion take place on our tracks that makes them look real small compared to how big they actually are. When you look at the tracks being eroded away, some of the first things that goes is the depth of that track. That hole goes away because the sides start to get worn down over time. Eventually it just gets a faint imprint, and then after that it's like chalk, like an eraser on a chalkboard. It just disappears. All right? I mentioned earlier we had 10 track sites in the park. We used to have 11. There used to be an 11th track site called track site number 3 on the other side of the overflow parking lot. You used to be able to look at that parking lot, look over the cliff, and see huge dinosaur tracks walking around. They're not there anymore because of the river. Any other questions y'all have? These are great questions. Keep them coming. Like I mentioned, my goal is to make sure that y'all leave with all your questions answered.
Do you think that any other dinosaurs walk here at any point, or just these two?
We do have evidence of two other species in the park. They're not as common as these two. Ornithomimid, which is like very close to a present-day ostrich. How many of y'all watched Jurassic Park? The very first one, where they're sitting under a log and these dinosaurs are jumping over them. That's Ornithomimid. So we have some of those tracks here in the park as well. The other dinosaur that we know that this is their range was Iguanodon. Haven't really found a lot of evidence of those dinosaur tracks yet, but who knows? Could be right under there. All right? You got a question real quick, sir? Same question. Are y'all looking for other track sites in the park?
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. I'll get you pointed in the right direction for those. This is the northernmost track site. So if you continue this way, you can follow the river all the way around, but you're not going to see tracks until you get the Dinio track site on the far other side. Most of the tracks are in this half-mile stretch of river from here down to the ballroom track site. It's half a mile from here to there. Most of the tracks are in that half-mile stretch. They're all in the river itself, and if you walk up and down the river, you're going to look for evenly spaced shadows or evenly spaced patches of vegetation, and those are your dinosaur tracks. At the ballroom site, that's my favorite track site in the park. It's the largest track site in the park, and it has the largest back feet for Sauroposeidon in the park. They are so big, I'm not kidding. I've been able to sit inside those dinosaur tracks myself. That's how big those tracks are. The only thing, you have to be willing to get in the river and get wet. They're all in the river. That track site's under about 2 feet of water. It's worth it, trust me. It's really cool. But they're all going to be up this way, either in the river or there's a hiking trail before you go up the stairs. Just continue down, and that trail follows all the way down and connects all the track sites together for you.